So as you've been so kind, thank you very much. Oh, you wanted me to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. Come back. It's all right. I have this effect on women. It's all right. Well, good evening, good afternoon, I think. I've got good news and bad news for you. The bad news is I'm going to be a classic lecturer and set you a test in this talk. Mental note, that's gone down well. The good news is it'll be a very simple test, and I think you will find it interesting, but also very useful for your business and professional lives. Is that okay? Yep. Not doing anything else for the next 20 minutes? That's fine. So, on to the business of storytelling. And storytelling is interesting because we often underestimate its extraordinary power to bind us together as a species, but most importantly, for your purposes professionally, to influence, to persuade, and sometimes to inspire, as I'll outline for you. And just to give you a couple of insights into the power of storytelling. Historically, before we had books, stories were the way that we passed knowledge, wisdom, insights, information down the generations, classically through elders telling stories around the campfire. And just to illustrate that, according to research carried out at a university somewhere to the west of here, whose name escapes me, somewhere near Bicester, University of Bicester, something like that. Part one of your test, does anybody happen to know what percentage of our day-to-day conversations in our lives are thought to be stories? Any guesses? 70? And it's like a game show, isn't it? Lower, higher, lower. A little bit lower, lower. Yeah? It's about 65%, according to Oxford research. About 65% of our day-to-day conversations are stories. And if you think about it now, it makes sense, because something happens at work, you tell your colleagues over a coffee, guess what just happened? You tell the story. Or you get home after a day at work and talk to your partner, talk to your family. Hey, you wouldn't believe what happened today. You tell the story. So stories are absolutely fundamental to us as a species. They bind us together. It's part of the fabric of our society. But possibly more important for our purposes in business and professional life, stories have a wonderful power to influence, to persuade, and to inspire. And that can be so useful for you, working with your teams, your staff, your colleagues, customers, selling, pitching for investment, whatever it is you're doing, stories can be so powerful. And to illustrate that, does anybody happen to know, as part two of your test, which of humanity's greatest achievements, perhaps the greatest, was brought about in large part through storytelling? Anyone know? Who? What? The Bible? Not the Bible? No, I'm thinking 1960s. Moon landing, yeah, the moon landing. The moon landing was brought about in large part by storytelling. And this is difficult to imagine now because, of course, we know what happened. But if I take you back to 1962, when President Kennedy made his iconic speech, "We choose to go to the moon," not because it's easy, but because it's hard. One of my favorite lines in speech making. America was way behind the Soviet Union in the space race, way behind. They were nowhere. The Soviets had put the first satellite into space, the legendary Sputnik moment. They put the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin. America was nowhere. They'd done none of that. But Kennedy was convinced they had to get back into the space race because, of course, space he saw as a new frontier in the Cold War that was raging at the time. But also the subtext, which was probably more important, more powerful, if more subtle. It was to reassert the supremacy of the free way of life. That fundamental binary struggle that was going on at that time, totalitarianism in the East, freedom in the West. Kennedy was convinced America had to win the space race. So he set NASA the challenge of putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade, less than 8 years, a big challenge. Yet Kennedy faced a problem. American public, American politicians were utterly unconvinced by this idea. They thought it would be expensive, the money could be better spent elsewhere, and it did cost a lot of money, billions upon billions. They thought it was dangerous, and of course it was. Many people lost their lives in the space race. And they also thought it was risky in terms of potential humiliation. America could fail in the eyes of the world in that great binary rivalry against the Soviet Union. Yet Kennedy was convinced America had to get into the space race. So he set about changing hearts and minds, and how did he do that? Through storytelling. He created a vision of a better tomorrow through an iconic leap of human progress, an achievement which would be talked about not just in the years, not just in the decades, but in the centuries ahead. The first time humanity set foot outside of this little beautiful blue-green bubble of ours. And that vision was so effective and so powerful in sweeping up people into its new tomorrow that it lingered even after the assassination of Kennedy in November '63, all through some very difficult times, loss of life, all the way through to July 1969, when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. That was the power of storytelling. And one little microcosm of that, just to illustrate how the story brought everyone along with it. Kennedy used to occasionally visit NASA headquarters to see how things were going. And he went one night, late at night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and he found a janitor mopping the floor. And Kennedy said to him, "What are you doing here at this time of night, mopping the floor?" And the janitor's reply has become celebrated for the power of storytelling it demonstrates. He said, "I'm not mopping the floor, Mr. President. I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Isn't that fascinating? How this story has bound everyone, even apparently the most humble, into being a part of it. So that is the power of storytelling, and how you can use stories in your business and professional lives to influence, persuade, and inspire. And to illustrate that, I'm going to tell you 3 brief stories now, because when I'm teaching storytelling, I always say, if you have something important you want to get across that really needs to land, needs to be remembered, put it in the form of a story, because facts fade, but stories stick. Always remember that. Facts fade, stories stick. Storytelling is your way to land a message. So here are 3 examples of that. And as part of my test, we'll do this as a compare and contrast exercise. So your first compare and contrast exercise is very significant, momentous actually, for me, as you'll see. And your compare and contrast here is, I could say to you, respect teachers. They have a wonderful power to transform lives. And I don't just say that because I'm a teacher now, but hey, respect teachers. And you would say, oh yeah, fair enough, Simon, we probably should respect teachers, they do transform lives. But will you remember that? Will it really make a connection with you? Will it stay with you? I don't think so. So let me tell you a story instead. A story that goes back to when I was a teenager. And it may surprise you to know that when I was around 14, I was a very troubled child. I was getting into a lot of bother at school. I was excluded and suspended for fighting and being disruptive and vandalism and running in gangs and all sorts of stupid stuff. And that behavior extended out of the classroom, and I was arrested by the police on various occasions for doing stupid things. And I was completely in danger of making absolutely nothing of my life, throwing it all away. Until one day. So imagine the scene. I'm strutting down the corridor of my ordinary state school doing my Simon tough guy strut. Couldn't give a stuff about anything. I really was like that back then. When out of a classroom jumped 2 teachers, Nigel Waugh and Jerry Lewis, and you'll see why I remember the names so well in a moment. They grabbed the horrible young me, pulled me into the classroom, locked the door behind us, and drew the curtains. Quite. At that point, I stopped being quite so cocky. I thought I was going to be beaten up for all the trouble I'd caused. This was the mid-1980s. It was a savage decade. That was perfectly possible. And these were big guys. Nigel, athlete, Jerry, rugby player, little me. I was scared. But actually what those two magnificent men did was gave me a 5-minute talking to, just 5 minutes, about how I was stupid because I had a good brain, I was smart. I could be eloquent, I could be thoughtful, I could be clever, I could be creative, I could do so much with my life, or I could chuck it all away, exactly as I was on course to do at that point. And they concluded by saying, now kid, get out of here, scram, and show us we were right. Show us you were worth us making this intervention to try to help you disappear. And I remember stumbling out of that classroom absolutely spellbound because no one had ever done anything like that for me in life before. Thought I was worth making that intervention to try to help me. And so from then onwards, I did turn life around. And I went on to do okay at school, went to university, joined the BBC, traveled to remarkable places, met extraordinary people, covered incredible events. And then I started writing, and I was published as an author, and I did radio work and TV work, and then came here to Cambridge, started my own business communications agency, Creative Warehouse, was invited to create and teach a course at this extraordinary university that surrounds us today. And here is the punchline. I don't think any of that would ever have happened without the 5-minute intervention of Nigel and Jerry all those years ago. So whenever I teach, whenever I lecture, give a talk like this, I always think back on those two wonderful men, and I hope I am fulfilling the great legacy they left me. So what will you remember? What makes the connection? My bland statement, respect teachers, they can transform lives, or my story? And here is the resonance of this story. When I was asked by the University of Cambridge to create and lead a course here at this extraordinary institution, I had to go through an interview with two scary professors. And I'm not academic. And one of the questions they asked me, quite rightly, was why do you want to teach for us? You're doing great. You know, you've got your own business communications agency, you're a writer and a journalist. Why do you want to teach? I could have said to them, because I understand the power of teachers to transform lives. And they would probably have said, oh, yeah, it's very good. But would it really have connected with them? Would it have made them feel they wanted me to be a part of this place? No. Instead, I told them the story I've just told you. And I know it hit them, because when I'd finished it, one of the professors said, with an outpouring of emotion, well, this is Cambridge after all. But they did tell me afterwards, that was the moment we knew we wanted you. You understood what you would do here. So the power of stories. Facts fade, stories stick. If you've got an important message, put it in a story. And I'll give you a couple of other very brief examples. My business, Creative Warehouse, I could just list what we do. We develop your key messages, we write them up into a website, we build the technology stuff around the website, we can record videos for you, we do the design work for you, we can teach you to pitch for investment, funding, customers, whatever. And you will sit there and nod and say, oh, yeah, thanks, Simon, yeah, great. I understand what you do. But does it stay with you? Does it make you think, oh, that's interesting, there's more to this bunch, I might want to work with them? So now compare and contrast that with the story I tend to tell when people ask me about Creative Warehouse. And it goes like this. When I first came to Cambridge, which was almost 8 years ago now, I was looking around for things to do. And I started to work with business people because I've done a fair bit with words, so I was helping them with reports and blogs and presentations. And I became closer to these people, and I started to become friends with them, and I greatly admired them because, well, you don't need me to tell you how hard you work to create prosperity and employment and contribute to society. So we became friends, and they would come to rely on me for their communications. But then would come a problem. They would say, right, now I need some design work. Can you help with that? No, I can't. I'm not a designer. Oh, okay, so I need a video done. Can you help with that? No, I'm not a cameraman, I'm not an editor, I can't help with that. Oh, I need a website built. Can you help with that? No, I can't do that either. And I started to feel I was failing these people who I so liked and admired, and I did not like that feeling. So I went out and found a great cameraman, ex-BBC and ITV and editor, a couple of great designers, a couple of terrific web developers, and brought them into the cooperative we now call Creative Warehouse, so that whenever anyone now asks me for anything communications-wise for their business, I don't feel I'm failing them anymore. And that is a much better feeling. So the part of your test here, compare and contrast, which is more effective? The list of my services or the origin story of the business? Which makes a connection, which is memorable, which makes you feel, well, maybe these people are worth working with, they sound interesting. And the final story I'll tell you, and this because, frankly, we've had a fantastic lunch. What a great place. Chatting away, enjoying ourselves. Sunshine Friday in Cambridge, what's not to like? This is not just the power of stories to teach us lessons and make us remember, but also the power of stories to entertain us. And that is so much of what they do. So, this final compare and contrast exercise, I could say to you, always hear people out before rushing to judgment. And you would say, oh yeah, fair enough, I should hear people out rather than judge them too quickly. Or I could tell you this story. And this is one of my favorite stories from my BBC days. And this goes back to the time of Mary Whitehouse. Anybody remember Mary Whitehouse here? Yes, she was great, wasn't she? Veteran campaigner for standards, if you don't remember Mary Whitehouse. She thought broadcasters had got far too progressive, too much sex and swearing and violence. She wanted to try and bring them back and retain greater standards. So although Mary was suspicious of a great deal of broadcasting, there was one place she always felt safe, and that was with BBC Radio 4. Loads of you listen to Radio 4, yeah? It's terrific broadcasting, isn't it? It is top-notch broadcasting. And the story goes that Mary always felt safe with Radio 4. Nothing could go wrong there. It was wonderful. So picture the scene. Mary is in her kitchen Sunday morning, chopping veg, getting ready for the Sunday roast, happily listening to Radio 4. What an idyllic scene, when on Radio 4 she hears the words, "Tits like coconuts." Mary rushes off to the phone, calls up the BBC complaints unit, and begins to harangue the poor chap on duty. Now, I never had the pleasure, but I'm told that with Mary, all you could do was let the storm blow itself out. So imagine, he's trying to get a word in. I cannot believe it, BBC Radio 4, and yet I hear tits like coconuts. What is the world coming to? And the poor chap is gently trying to get a word. Yes, madam, yes, madam. I don't understand. How can this happen? Radio 4, tits like coconuts. What is the world coming to? And eventually, when the storm did blow itself out, and he did manage to get a word in edgeways, yes, madam, you did indeed hear the phrase, tits like coconuts. But had you listened on, you would have heard, yet sparrows prefer breadcrumbs.